That was You Got This by Love and the Outcome. Good morning. You're listening to Lindy Jones and I'm right here on Rhema CC. I hope you've had a great week. Can you believe we've made it to yet another Sunday? Week by week, this year is flying by and we're heading quickly into 2024. This coming week is both my dad and my son's birthday. Happy birthday, Dad, and happy birthday, Zeph. Between my sister and I, we've managed to double up on dates that were already special celebrations in our family and have babies to keep the dates even more special. I've managed to have a Mother's Day baby on the anniversary of my grandma's passing and a baby on my dad's birthday. My sister had her youngest on our parents' anniversary. So in our family, there's not much chance that we can forget those special days. But back to how crazy it is that we're in these last few months of 2023. When I look back at the beginning of the year, I'm not sure what I had hoped to achieve or thought I would even entail. It's been a big one though. For me personally, for us I should say, we've moved house. We've watched as our eldest flew out to live overseas for 6 months. We watched as our second daughter had her first baby, met our first grandchild, seen our third daughter get her licence and the plenty of frightening realities that go with that. We've seen our fourth start his first job, our fifth return to the same school as her older brother, our sixth starting school, and our seventh settling into daycare, which has given me an opportunity to contribute more to church and local community and focus as much as I can on studying. My husband has had a couple of months off on long service leave, probably more needed than either of us had actually realised, and we've been working hard to not only sort ourselves out, but build and strengthen our marriage and our family. It has been an interesting 9 months. Most of these situations have been beautiful, bright and positive experiences. But if you could see inside our home in the years prior, it's never been anything other than beautiful, but you bet it's been crazy. It's been stressful, it's been intense, overwhelming, a time of complete dependence on God. And this was even in the years prior to COVID. All of us battled during COVID lockdowns, questioning how things were handled, personal stresses like job loss or financial pressures. We were forced to face some uncomfortable decisions during that time, and I witnessed the battle between Christians as even more intense because everyone had their own position or take on the situations that we were forced to address. And their views came not just from a medical perspective, but a spiritual angle too. I still feel for the pastors and the ministry leaders who are only just now starting to unwind and process the many changes that they were forced to make, and often with only a day's notice. I know we were having a youth car wash as lockdown number 2 was announced. It was a delightful and sombre moment all in one because we were watching our youth getting active, serving the community again and staying hopeful for the funds they would raise for the state youth camp, which coincidentally this year is this very weekend for the Baptist churches. And then in just a few seconds, the whole mood changed. We were headed back to seeing no one for who knew how long. And it was devastating and uncomfortable, scary even. This was a period of time when none of us knew what was coming next, and it was beyond unsettling. Our teachers copped the full brunt big time, dealing with uncharted territory and educating online, and the implications that even today mean that students are still somewhat frazzled. The medical staff, doctors, nurses, paramedics, those who had to deal with all aspects of health, the managers of each business, leaders in our community, the head guys who had to make a call for a totally new direction at the drop of a hat. It was a horrible, horrible time in our history, and not one of us cruised throughout without being impacted in some way. So this year has been a big change in all the happy ways. When I look back over the past 9 months, there's a piece that a few years earlier I wouldn't have been able to comprehend. I think it certainly helps that connection and community has become more relevant to many of us. So to be able to have it without being questioned is something to truly be thankful for. However, this doesn't mean things don't happen that leave us bewildered or sad at times. It doesn't mean things always go to plan. I've been coming across many people in the past few weeks who are living through or with situations that aren't going the way that they'd anticipated or expected. And so That's the topic of the day. But let me first tell you how I came to this decision for this week's topic. I'd sort of locked in the idea of exploring how we can best look after ourselves physically. Spring is here. It seemed like a great time to work on our physical goals, whether through eating better or moving more. I'd spoken to a PT and we'd sort of locked it in loosely. Then this week I came down with a tummy bug and nothing much was thought of. I was just thankful that I'd almost completed an assessment that was due this week, because I can tell you the brain fog that came with this thing, it was not fun. I still don't actually know what I submitted for an assessment that I wrote, and I don't know if I want to know. And the not-for-profit that we run at church has recently become my baby, so I felt terrible when on Wednesday I couldn't help out. It meant that I had to rely more on my husband, our community chaplain and other volunteers more than I'd like to admit. My hubby's plans had to change too, because we were able to suddenly get a builder in to make changes to the cottage, the building where we offer free fruit, veggies, bread and cheap groceries each week. And that too meant a big change how we do things for the next week or two. I needed him to step in and explain to the volunteers what was happening over the next couple of weeks. It was a similar role that he'd been doing before he took long service leave. It's fun and positive and a great responsibility, but it certainly takes away from his other duties as a pastor. So I felt really bad. My plans changing meant his plans changing. Making changes to the cottage probably meant more plans changing for our community chaplain, not to mention the plans that others had or have who regularly come to our cottage each week. Change has a ripple effect, but it is something we all regularly experience. That's how we ended up here. We're talking when things don't go to plan and preparing for change. So stick with me as we explore how to handle situations that don't go to plan and dealing with change. I'm looking forward to spending a little time with you this morning. Right now, though, we're about to hear Beyond This World by Sean Locke. Well, welcome back. You're listening to Rhema CC. I'm Lindy Jones, joining you on your morning journey this Sunday. I hope your day has started reasonably well. I explained in our earlier segment that we are discussing the topic of when things don't go to plan after a week of things, well, nothing too serious or overly even tough, didn't quite go to plan in my world. But it was a gentle reminder that there are hearts out there that are troubled or distressed because things aren't going to plan on a more serious level. And there are souls still trying to establish some sort of normal after a few years of us all being somewhat shifted and directed in directions that none of us had anticipated. There are people out there who, even just this week, have received news that someone or something is about to change in their lives. And that can be incredibly unsettling. Even in our churches, changes can occur that leave us feeling abandoned or lost. I've become aware of a few churches just here on the coast who have recently been informed that their leadership, the people who they love, are needing to move on elsewhere for one reason or another. And that is so hard. A friend sobbed in the arms of another friend just a few weeks ago as she dealt with the news that her pastor and family will be starting off 2024 in a new setting. I stood behind both of them knowing that this is one of the hardest parts of ministry. When you love people and you are privileged enough to walk life with them, it's these moments that are beyond challenging. A part of your heart is ripped out every time a move needs to be made. And it makes starting off in a new place and in a new setting really hard too. I know for me, I've learnt how to apply the love loosely rule because ministry often means dealing with the unexpected, the change of plans. We have people walk into our lives and we have people walk out. We have people upset over situations or things that we don't necessarily understand. They can be so big in the mind of the other person that they decide that they just can't continue with our church or ministry, and then we, those working in ministry, can be left spinning, wondering what on earth we have done wrong or could change. In so much of ministry, the power we falsely all believe we have is often placed in the hands of others. And in turn, it can mean change in an instant or upcoming changes of an original plan. I guess I want you to know this. If you are a part of the church, your local church, your pastors, your ministry leaders, they love you. Of course, we're human, but we hurt when you walk away or don't stick with the plan or direction of the church. And we hurt again because we do love you. We recently lost someone at our church who every one of us could say was a different type of personality. He was always the friendliest of people you could come across, always had a big smile on his face and was the first person to come up and say something supportive after church. But at times it felt like he had no idea about personal boundaries. He was loud and he was a little awkward. But you bet he was loved. To have him with us one week and then by the following realise we're never going to see him again while here on earth caused quite a stir. Many of our church members were left feeling torn by all the emotions they felt, confused because they hadn't been as accommodating as they would have liked to have thought they could have been, and his personality, but also thankful that he was a ray of sunshine all the time regardless. Having him suddenly gone reminded me that change can come quickly and leave us in a state of shock. And as odd as it sounds, as I was preparing this week, or last week actually, for a family type service we had at church, our kids' church stayed in, so it was a family type service. But as I prepared, I became more saddened because this man, I had thought of him as I was planning. I knew that he was going to love the stage, how it was arranged. I knew that he'd enjoy the kids being a part of it, that we spent some real quality time in real worship. I knew that he would have been interactive and supported what I had planned with words of encouragement straight after the service. Him not being there was noticed. I guess what I'm saying is that as someone who's been living ministry life for about 18 years, I can pass on this truth. It doesn't matter how painful you are or the things that you come to us with frustration over. We're still going to love you. And if you decide that you need to move along or make some changes, yeah, it'll hurt. But we also understand that though change or plans not going along as predicted can be tough, there is also room for growth and positivity to flourish. When my friend was consumed with sadness a few weeks ago and spent time distressed because her pastor's family have been asked to step into another role in another location, I reminded her that they are not the church. I told her, you guys the church, you guys. Yes, they've led and they've led you all well. But they are not the church, you are. You keep doing what you're doing. Pray for each other, support each other, welcome new people in, love them as family. Remember that you are the church and God has blessed you through this season with these special pastors. He knows what his plans are, even when the change hurts and the plans you had are no longer possible. As much as situations can leave our churches shaken and uncertain of what is to come when leaders need to step aside, it is equally, or even more so, difficult for those who are leading the church to walk away. Caring for the flock, even when the method of care hasn't necessarily been understood by those of the flock, because that can happen sometimes, comes with risk. You know, as you enter or begin a ministry or start over in a new one, you're going to love the people you work and walk with. And you know there's a risk you'll experience change with them at times, hurt with them at times, and rejection at times. But again, you also understand that it is so worth it. Your ministry leaders are there for you when things aren't going to plan. They're there for you when change occurs, and they'll love you as best as they can through all of it. Draw on the resources you have today if you're finding that you are overwhelmed with frustration because things aren't going the way you'd hoped. Give them a call and let them know how they can be praying for you as you walk through the changes you're experiencing. And if you happen to be in one of the churches whose leadership feels a little up in the air at the moment, remember, you are the church. The people who you do life with, the people you share your Sunday with, you are the church if you love and serve Christ. You. So be the church through change. Be the church when things feel shaky and uncertain. Be the church when others are facing failed plans for their lives. Love in action. Love like we see in the book of Acts. Just do. Do good, serve well, and pray hard for each other. Change, oddly, particularly when change has come through failed plans, can be a pivotal moment for those who need the assurance of God's love. And it can be a powerful moment for the church. grab hold and do good. More than anything, remember this. Now, James 1:3 says, "For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness." And Matthew 7:24-25, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock." Keep standing inside that house, praising him through all the change and all the uncertainty. He will not be moved. You're listening to Rhema CC. I'm Lindy Jones. We'll be back shortly to talk more about unscheduled plans and making or preparing for change. This is Battles by the Afters. Well, a big welcome back to each of you listening this morning. I'm Lindy Jones, and you are my wonderful listeners of Rhema CC. Thanks for joining me this morning. I know this can be a busy time of the week for some of you, so I'm hoping you can get a moment to breathe and be still before your Creator, to hear him and see him in the little things and the big things. We had a pretty powerful church service last week. I'd arranged a family-type service where our kids were involved in running it. I was originally talking to our church about 4 different types of penguins. That was the original plan, and then I wondered what the point of it all was. Well, there was a point when we discovered the different character traits of each type of penguin. We can learn by looking at them that something along the lines of God's love, or how shall we be Christians, is to be learnt. An example here is the Gen 2 penguin. Now, this little guy can dive up to 450 times a day. We can learn to be like this little man because he's almost like a fisher of men. He just keeps going. There were others if we looked at different penguins, but I guess that's for another time. This is just an example. But then we got deeper and looked at God's intricate design, the detail in all of his creation. There's some powerful moments and movements that can take place when we really comprehend how big God is and how little we can be. I saw a moment in that service, or should I say a movement in that service, that I've never seen before. People were authentically praising because every one of us were fully comprehending the awesomeness of God. But imagine if I hadn't been open to the option of change, or been completely locked into the idea of sticking only with the original plan. We can resist change, and we can limit God's movement when we do. When we're so caught up in the plan that we had for our lives and consume ourselves with the if only, we fail to see the bigger picture, that God is bigger than we can comprehend, and that his ways are far beyond what we can even fathom. Isaiah 55:8-9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts your thoughts." We have a choice when we are confronted with failed plans or changes that are about to take place. We can choose to mope, and God only knows how many times I've done that. I'm so guilty. Or we can surrender and allow God's plan to override our disappointment. That response comes with humility and a willingness to understand we're not always going to have it together. God uses those moments to remind us that he is God and we aren't. And that's an exciting awareness to suddenly grasp. Just like the 4 types of penguins I shared with our church last week and the varying roles that they play, there is a role for each of us. God knows the plans he has for us because they are plans to prosper and protect. They are plans to give us a hope for the future. For assurance on that, check out Jeremiah 29:11-13. Our plans are not necessarily his. He can see the beauty he's hoping to give rise to when all we can see is the mess of a situation, when all we can focus on are the plans that didn't ever eventuate. Look at the bigger picture today. Don't be like me last week. Don't focus on the small aspect of a greater message that God is trying to convey to you and to those who are watching as your life evolves and the path changes. Your story is his story. You're listening to Rhema CC, and this is Living by Young and Free. Welcome back. You're listening to Rhema CC, and I'm Lindy Jones. It's lovely to be seeing you on your Sunday morning with you. We started off this morning with me explaining that I had planned to spend this week discussing physical fitness and health. Then my plans changed as my 3-year-old kindly shared a tummy bug, and any thought of this Sunday went completely out the door. Spring originally felt like the right time to chat about getting out and about and looking after ourselves from a physical perspective. And yet we're here, not really talking about it at all. But as I ventured into the discussion of things not going to plan, I figured, hey, I can throw a little bit of my original plan into this in some way too. Until we moved to the coast, I was always your gym fanatic. I was at the gym most days of the week, determined to not let myself go after each of our babies. I had pretty firm standards of myself and did everything I could to stay within the healthy weight range for my height. I'm a shorty too. So when we moved to the coast, my resources weren't as accessible. Suddenly, the reality that I didn't have family around to help out with our kids, and I hardly knew anyone to really ask for help, really sort of settled in, and I understood that things had to be different. So for the first year, maybe 2 years, it was okay. I eventually had all of our kids in either school or preschool and had a couple of days to myself each week that allowed me a little bit of time to spend working on my physical fitness. Though it was different, not as psychologically pressured, I'd have to say. It was more about just physically moving. In Sydney, my focus had been on how I looked. Oddly, when I look back, I think I looked healthier and happier when the pressure was off psychologically, and I used exercise to get out and walk the local beaches or enjoy the lake at the end of the road. Then last year happened. Now, I've mentioned in previous weeks that I have always struggled with anxiety, and depression has made its way in and out of my life time and time again. But last year was the biggest hurdle of all my mental health hurdles. I'm talking, I literally couldn't walk from the lounge to the dining table in our house, which couldn't have been more than 10 metres, without physically shaking from head to toe. I slept on the lounge if I slept. I'd sleep for a few minutes and wake up suddenly with a burning sensation running through my body. It eventually settled to just up and down my left arm. I had appointments with a heart specialist and scans on my brain, all to discover there was nothing to worry about too much, thankfully, though I apparently do have a heart condition that isn't of too much concern. I was poked and prodded, tested for all sorts of medical conditions, and the conclusion? My anxiety was giving me one massive run for my money, though I would have paid anything to not experience it. I felt trapped. I was at home by myself in the Hunter with 2 little guys after we'd been through 2 lockdowns since my youngest was born. And a side note there, he was born literally on the day everything went into lockdown the first time. So coming out of hospital to a totally different world where I couldn't show anyone my newborn was not only bizarre, it was also depressing. I'd battled for months at home with our 7 kids in our 4-bedroom house during the second lockdown, where we knew no one because we'd only just moved. I spent most days in the garden rearranging plants and avoiding the chaos I could hear within my walls. And then 4-year-old wasn't coping with everyone at home constantly, and the meltdowns were huge. Don't get me wrong, I was still being the parent, but at every chance I could grab, with the littlest amount of resources I'd ever had, I found any way that I could to psychologically survive. Mike was usually at work still because he was allowed back on the coast for work purposes as a pastor, but I was alone, and I wasn't just physically alone. I was emotionally alone, psychologically alone, and spiritually alone. I'd been battling resentment towards God. My plans, the ones I had for my life, had just been blatantly ignored. He didn't care about what I hoped and dreamed of. Instead, the way I saw it at the time was that he'd forgotten me. I started to believe that he just didn't care and that I was supposed to just give up on the goals I had for myself and surrender to what I believed he was telling me to do, something that offered no joy or excitement. It felt dull, and it gave me no reason to get up each day with passion. Gradually, I started to surrender. I slowly let go of the plans I had for my life and offered my life to God instead. There was one moment in particular, and I don't think I can go into it too deeply here, but I remember really it was a defining moment in my willingness to let God have and take over whatever plans he had for my life. In short, I end up on the floor of Gosford Hospital feeling all sorts of weird, a hot and cold surging through me that was beyond strange. As I ended up on the floor, nurses and doctors swarmed me and took my blood pressure and pulse rate. It was 180 beats per minute, and they didn't know what to do with me. I was watched intensely for over an hour as they waited to see what my heart was going to do next. But laying there in emergency, I prayed, as weak as I was, and suddenly my family were my top priority. I told God I wanted to get home to my kids that needed me and to my husband. They were my priority, and the plans that I'd always had for myself just no longer mattered. That experience, I believe, was the initial point of where my anxiety started to kick in, and I was living on high alert constantly. And so last year, when I was at the point of not being able to walk across the room because I was shaking so badly, and the nighttime became my worst fear and greatest comfort, I realised something had shifted in me. My plans were genuinely no longer my plans. I'd given up. I was defeated. And then God showed up. He showed up through the counsellors and psychologists. He showed up when I spent nights staring out the back door looking at his beautiful star-filled sky, and I pleaded with him to take my shell of a being and give me some reason to fight back to health again. He showed up when he opened the door to our next-door neighbour, who at the time we didn't know was a Christian. She came and she prayed over me. God showed up when I reached up to an anxiety group in the local area. They not only embraced me, but prayed with me online and on the phone. They stomped into heaven on my behalf and asked God for healing and restoration. God showed up through my GP by assessing every avenue of my health that she knew how to. God showed up through a website called anxietycenter.com, a Christian counselling service in Canada and the US. They offered real advice from real people who had really experienced and walked what I was walking. God showed up through our church. The practical support they offered when they arranged and paid for us to get away as a family for 3 weeks, as I learnt to move again. My fight, flight and freeze was beyond overstimulated, and freeze was apparently my response of choice during that time. There were so many levels and aspects of this challenging time in my life, but in the end, and from every angle, my God showed up. I can see it now, and I could vaguely see it then. I was learning to give him my plans finally, and he was responding to an even deeper prayer, to restore me and rebuild me the way that he wanted me to be, and to offer me the hope he promises by showing me his plans for my life. I watched this week as the house next door was demolished. A couple of months ago, we were at home and my husband was out the back trimming the trees when all of a sudden there was a popping coming from the little rundown shack next door. Smoke billowed and within seconds there were flames. I grabbed our kids after calling the emergency services and moved our car slightly up the road. I waited and watched as truck after truck pulled up and the police and fireys lined our little tucked away street. Our kids were freaking out and I was a mixture of calm and petrified all in one. Then I watched the flames grow bigger and bigger. I suddenly realised that I hadn't arranged insurance. I hadn't worried about it because if you knew where we were located, you'd probably think just as I did and wonder what on earth could go wrong out there anyway. I prayed quicker and louder and stronger in that moment than I had in a long time. After paying for insurance for over 20 years and never getting a cent back to cover anything, I was ticked off at myself for not really considering it as important when we moved back to the coast in March this year. But this little story here, well, it reminded me that sometimes we need trouble or a scare to really work out what is important. Sometimes we have to surrender our plans to allow God's to take hold. And sometimes he has to plan to knock down and rebuild because he can see what he will do with the rubble and chaos. I watched this week as piece by piece the old shack was removed. That's what God had been doing in my life and continues to do in my life. He is slowly replacing the old with the new. And as for my focus on physical health and fitness, he's replacing that mentality too. I went without any real exercise for about 1.5 years because honestly, my anxiety taught me to be fearful of what my heart might do, particularly after the incident at the hospital. I'd never been and have never been as unfit or unhealthy as I have been in the past year. But over the past couple of months, have gradually been getting myself back to the gym with around 3 or 4 times a week because I know it's important to care for my physical body as well as care for my emotional, psychological and spiritual health. Don't be afraid to stare down the anxieties associated with unwanted change or the change of plans directly. Give them to God and allow Him to show you how He wants to work through them. Is there something important you failed to see? Or is He rebuilding your life and showing you how together you can find a path to a brighter, more stable future? On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. Those words sound familiar? Cling to them, sing them, live them. We're going to leave it here for a bit now, but don't forget that we have church on the radio at 10 a.m. If you can't make it to your local church today, this is a great way to stay connected, to hear more of God's message and really be challenged in your God journey a bit more. Right now, though, we're going to hear No Hold on Me by Matty Mullins. Thanks for listening to Rhema CC. I'm Lindy Jones. I'll see you soon. Good morning and thanks for joining me here on Rhema CC. I'm Lindy Jones and it has honestly been a delight to share this morning with you. Considering I had no idea how this morning was going to pan out after a week of plans not going as they were, well, planned, I'm thankful that again, God has shown up. He has led every weave of this crazy tapestry I've been trying to pull together, and somehow it seems to have all made the point I guess He was wanting us to hear. For His plans to really take hold and play out, sometimes He needs to allow a bit of a shake-up or a wake-up. Sometimes He needs us to hit rock bottom or be completely overtaken by the freeze response, rather than a fight or flight where we are left but with nothing other than Him and us. Sometimes we are like the house that needs to be demolished and a rebuild needs to take place. Whatever the circumstance, when our plans don't go the way we had hoped or the changes seem to be sweeping over us in an uncomfortable circumstance or situation, when changes are taking place quickly and we don't think we have time to think, we can remember who we can anchor ourselves on. It's not on each other, though that will help in some ways. It is by restoring our faith in the God we say we stand for and believe in. It is by handing our everything, our hopes, dreams and plans over to Him because He hears our heart cry and He responds. Through others, through circumstances, through the challenges of our heart, the heart that the Holy Spirit brings. Hand it over to Him. All of it. Just surrender. Let me close today with this. Ecclesiastes 3:1-8. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Your plans may not be His plans. Trust Him. He knows what He is doing. Until next week, praying for God's provision and care in your life. I'm Lindy Jones and I'll see you right back here on Rhema CC next Sunday morning. This is This Could Change by Francesca Battistelli.